Salutations. So many of you enjoyed that other Charlie Rose interview with Milton Friedman I posted. I went back and I found his first appearance on the Charlie Rose Show back from 1999. Milton has such a good nature. He has just a way of picking apart Charlie Rose's arguments with a smile. You guys are really going to enjoy this. A lot of stuff in here that's very relevant today, so enjoy.
Milton Friedman is here. He is one of the most influential economists of this century. A champion of the free market economy, his contribution to economic theory, political thought, and public policy have earned him a place of honor alongside such giants as Alfred Marshall and John Maynard Keynes. For these achievements, he was awarded the Nobel Prize for Economics in 1976. He was also economic advisor to Barry Goldwater and Presidents Nixon and Reagan. He is Professor Emeritus of Economics at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University. It is an honor to have him at this table. I am pleased to see him again when I am in the Bay Area. Welcome to the program.
Glad to be here.
This is the first time you've been on the program,
yes,
and I've been trying for some time to get you here, so I'm glad that we could make this happen. I don't know where to start. Let me talk first about where you see this economy, that we seem to be enjoying prosperity.
We are.
And why do you think that's true? And how long do you think it will last? And what might be challenges to it?
Well, those are all difficult questions. Let's start with why we're here. We're here, I believe, first, because we've followed a monetary policy that has brought inflation down and kept it relatively stable. And the major threat to it is the re-emergence of inflationary tendencies. The achievement of inflation, of a relatively inflation-free economy, is, in my opinion, primarily due to the performance of the Federal Reserve Board. I have been a long-time student and critic of the Federal Reserve Board. It deserves a lot of blame for past mistakes, including the inflation of the 1970s. Right. But since the middle of the 80s, it's been performing much better. It's had its rare period of really keeping a stable monetary environment and keeping emphasis on low inflation, not letting itself be diverted.
So you give Alan Greenspan lots of credit for calibrating money supply in order to make sure that inflation was down.
That's right.
And being very careful and prepared to raise interest rates if he thought inflation was creeping back.
Right. Yeah. Now, that test is up right now because he will shortly have to raise interest rates to keep inflation from creeping back. And we'll see what happens.
Now, why is it creeping back?
Because monetary growth was allowed to be too high a year ago. Mm-hmm. It's more recently he's been drawing it down, keeping it lower. Yeah. But that's the major reason.
When you draw down monetary growth, you increase the interest rates.
Right.
Money becomes tighter.
A minor reason is because the East Asian crisis brought us a bonanza of low prices for many physical and material goods. And the East Asia crisis is turning the corner. You no longer have declining prices of those raw materials. And as a result, we don't have that bonanza.
But see, that's an interesting idea. You alone have argued that the Asian economic crisis was a bonanza for America. The Asian economic recovery is a threat to America.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a threat precisely because it threatens the re-emergence of higher interest rates, both because of its effect on the prices of raw materials, but also because if East Asia revives, it will mean an increase in the demand for credit, and that will tend to raise interest rates as well. So on both scores, it threatens us. But an additional reason for the success in inflation, I believe, is the accident of having a situation in which the president was Democratic and the House and Senate were Republican. As a result, there's been a lot of talk. There have been a lot of minor bills, but there has been no major new program initiated. And that is one of the best things that has happened. It's one of the unintended consequences of a divided House and a divided...
But would you say the same thing if the president was a Republican like Ronald Reagan, that it would be good to have a Democratic Congress?
It might not be good for other reasons,
yeah.
But from the economic point of view, from the point of view of not having the government mess things up, it would be good.
There's some belief in public opinion polling that the Americans like that idea, that in a sense they will vote for a Bill Clinton because they think that Congress is going to be Republican. In 1996, they did that.
There's no doubt that the people widespread have lost their faith in government as a solver of all problems. There is a widespread anti-government consensus, and yet everybody recognizes that it's very difficult to cut government down. It's easy to relatively easy to pass laws. It's almost impossible to repeal them. How many laws can you think of that have been repealed? Prohibition was repealed. That's an amendment in 1931.
Not many is the answer.
Very.
We had, although the problems of foreign adventures, which we'll talk about in a moment, probably will lead up the surplus. In part, yes? Or not?
Well, so far as the surplus is concerned, that's a result of the... If you had, in my opinion, if the government had been all of one party, that surplus would never have emerged.
Since it emerged, though, I know you feel that way because...
It ought to be given back to the people. It ought to be... You need tax cuts. We are an overtaxed nation. Taxes on this country are higher now than at any time in past history, higher than at the peak in World War II. And you need an across-the-board tax cut very badly.
Because what? Why?
Because otherwise government will spend it. History shows definitely that the government will spend whatever the tax system will yield, plus as much more as it can get away with. And now, government is too big. Its programs aren't working. It's doing far more harm than good. We don't need any additional government programs. We need to get rid of the ones that aren't working.
I remember President Clinton, after the Republican win in 1994, standing before Congress in the State of the Union saying the era of big government is over.
That was rhetoric. The era of big government is over, and yet President Clinton has been proposing a whole host of new programs.
But they're small programs.
Of course they're small, because with a divided Congress, divided Washington, he cannot get a big program. If the Congress and were Democratic, I can guarantee you that surplus would have been...
Now, here's what's interesting about your philosophy, which you know, is that for you, the free market, it is not just a question, it's not a question of economics primarily, it's a moral question.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's a moral question for a very simple reason. In a free market, if you and I make a deal, we both benefit. In a political situation, if you benefit, it's at my expense. The important thing is to have a world in which people can cooperate without using force. And the only way you can cooperate without using force is if everybody benefits from the deal.
What do you make of the argument that the economic policies of the Clinton administration have been much stronger than the economic policies of the Reagan administration? Because, let me finish, the Reagan administration created a huge deficit, and the Clinton administration, under the leadership of Bob Rubin, and while Alan Greenspan was at the Federal Reserve, created a deficit.
A surplus.
It created a surplus and reduced the deficit. Yeah. And therefore, in the end, it was a better economic model and a better economic program.
I don't regard it as a better economic model to say that the government did a better job of taking money from the pockets of productive people and turning it over to the unproductive people.
But that wasn't a tax-the-rich program, was it?
Hold on for a moment. Let's go back. The fraction of the income of the American people that is going to the federal government is higher than it has ever been, and considerably higher than during the Reagan administration. Moreover, unlike most people, I did not regard those deficits in the Reagan administration as a bad thing.
You didn't?
No, because they were the only...
The amount of money we were spending on debt service didn't bother you?
Not a bit. I can think of no government program, government expenditure that does less harm
than spending money to pay for our interest.
You're paying interest to people. You're not affecting their incentives. Let's go back to the main thing, however. The deficit was the only thing that kept pressure on government to keep spending down.
Oh, yeah, but that's a structural argument you're making. The idea, as long as Ronald Reagan built up this huge deficit, it would keep the Congress from passing legislation because it would contribute to the deficit, right?
No, let's go back. How did the deficit get built up? It got built up because Ronald Reagan embarked on a stronger defense program.
Right.
That stronger defense program was a major factor that ultimately led to the fall of the Berlin Wall.
Absolutely.
And it was well worth it. All right, now, how should he have financed it? Should he have imposed more taxes to finance it? Or wasn't it better to finance it by having a temporary deficit, which in turn kept pressure on the rest of government spending?
Well, let me just tell you the two parts of that argument. One, that some might question. One is that whether the Russian economy would have collapsed and the Russians would have collapsed anyway.
They would have collapsed eventually
the Russian
anyway.
economy was in bad shape, and you'd be the first to acknowledge that.
I'm
it was going to probably totter of its own weight at some point anyway. Yes?
Ronald Reagan gave a talk in I think it was 83.
The Evil Empire talk?
No, this was another talk, I think at Notre Dame, 84 or something like that, in which he said that the Russian communist regime is on the way to collapse. He predicted that it will collapse. He said Marx was right about the two systems could not coexist, but it was the communist system, not the capitalist system, that was destined to the ash heaps of history.
And he convinced them because he convinced Gorbachev that he was willing to spend the American dollar in terms of building up weapons that they could not afford to match, and therefore they might as well get out of the race.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And therefore that for you was money well spent because it ended the Cold War. And
well, isn't it for you?
Absolutely, but I'm just making the case for you. Although I'm not, I'm not sure that we have developed an alternative architecture for dealing with the world after the Cold War.
Oh, we have not. On the contrary, we've been doing very badly. We've had much worse foreign policy in recent years than we had in the Reagan-Bush period.
Yeah. You have any economic nationalism in you of the kind that people like Pat Buchanan will articulate?
No, I hope not.
Yeah, because it's anti-Semitic or because of what?
But it isn't even nationalism.
Yeah.
It isn't nationalism. Keeping steel, take steel, which is the case, because steel has political clout. Whom are we benefiting by keeping steel out? We're making the price of steel higher. We're making automobile prices higher than they otherwise would be.
Well, but Buchanan, I didn't mean to say anti-Semitic, but Buchanan would say to you, Pat Buchanan, if he was here, would say to you, it's more important to me to keep the steel out and protect those workers who are losing their jobs and have nowhere to go.
And what about protecting the people who are being forced to pay a higher price for steel? What about protecting the people who are producing products to be exported? It's a false argument.
Right. And therefore it's never caught hold, in fact, recently.
No, well, it has caught hold.
Well, the unions make the argument in some cases.
No, but we've been, the United States, political, has gone through a high tariff period. The Republicans were it's a strange thing. The Republicans for many years were high tariff and the Democrats were low tariff. And then more recently, the Democrats have been high tariff because of the unions and the Republicans have been low tariff.
But here's an interesting dilemma, I would think, for some. It is that you feel, if there's a word that I would identify with you, it is freedom or liberty.
Absolutely.
One of the two.
I hope that's right.
I mean, you're a libertarian in philosophy. You'd like to see the government involved in contracts, national security, contracts, and police, protecting you in your home.
That's right.
Right? That's it for you. That's pretty much it, right?
Well, I've spelled out in detail what I would like to see, but those are the key functions. There's no question. And there's no question, and I think nobody will disagree, that as the government has gone into things it has no business doing, it has been doing the things it alone can do less well.
Yeah, privatization is a great idea.
Absolutely.
Whose time has come.
Yes,
a long time ago.
Right.
All right, but stay with me here.
Yeah.
With your sense of freedom and what you know about the People's Republic of China, do you, in the interest of economic policy and free trade, support their entry into the World Trade Organization, to make them fully trade partners, and look the other way at whatever abridgment of freedom they may be making on their own citizens?
Those are two separate statements that should not be combined. You should not look the other way.
That's a euphemistic way for saying stupid question.
No. You should not look the other way with respect to their abridgment of human rights. It's a disgrace what they're doing on the human rights side. But insofar as a advance toward a market economy, That is the best thing you can do to improve human rights. Look, there's been an enormous improvement in human rights in China in the last 20 years.
Because the markets have been open.
It so happens that I have been in China 3 times, in 1980, in 1988, and in 1993. And what impressed me most about the difference between those 3 times was the extent of human freedom, and came entirely because of the opening of the market. So we should do everything we can to open the market. If bringing China into the WTO opens the market, fine. But that doesn't mean that we should neglect the human rights issue.
Your argument becomes what the president's argument is: disconnect human rights arguments and economic arguments.
Absolutely, absolutely, you should. Now, on the other hand, I'm not supporting the idea that we should. The one purpose for which you should depart from free trade is for national defense. And that gets down to the question.
So you don't sell what? Certain technology items to them to allow them, whoever it is, to make a bomb.
So I'm not defending, if it's true, if what the Cox report alleges, and
Christopher Cox's report about espionage and the extent of espionage suggests that they have vastly accelerated their nuclear potential by stealing from the United States with serious security lapses on the part of several administrations.
And with help from 2 large enterprises, Hughes and L'Oreal. So you should not excuse the behavior of Hughes and L'Oreal on the ground of economic advance. I am not. See, there's a big confusion. To say that I am a free market, I believe in free markets, but that doesn't mean I'm a defender of big enterprises. I want competition. And the essence, the basic argument for a free market economy is that it prevents enterprises from exploiting anybody else, that the market provides protection to people from being exploited.
How would you fix public education?
No question. I would privatize it.
All of it?
All of it.
How would you do that?
The first step would be to have a system of educational vouchers so that parents can choose where their children go to school.
And there would be no public involvement here?
The public, oh yes, there would be. There is. Let's get things straight.
Okay, I'm trying.
Public involvement in education does not derive from the fact that government runs schools. It derives from the laws for compulsory education.
Right.
If you have compulsory education.
And it also comes from the fact that public expenditures finance schools.
I know, but no, what I'm saying is it doesn't come from that. It needn't come from that.
No, I see.
For example, everybody has to have a license to drive a car.
Right.
But the government doesn't provide the driving schools. It doesn't provide the cars. And so similarly, I am in favor of a system under which the government says to every parent, if you choose to send your child to a private school, we are now spending in the state of California about $6,000 per child in a government school. And if you choose to save us that money, we'll give you at least half of it back. We'll give you $3,000, which you can use only for tuition. And in that way, you could bring competition. Let me bring this point out in another way. The United States is the world's leader in higher education.
No question.
Young people, eager, energetic people come from all over the world to study in our universities. We rate near the bottom in elementary and secondary education. In every international comparison, we're something like 19th out of 21 countries. Country after country get better. How can that be? The answer is very simple. In higher education, the student chooses the institution, and the institution has to adapt to attract a student. In elementary and secondary education, the institution chooses the student, and the student has to adapt. Choice and competition is what makes the difference. It's the reason why we rank very high in higher education and very low in elementary and secondary education. And in the universal voucher system would enable parents to have the right to choose the schools their children go to choose a school that's better for their child.
Conservative revolution, which let's assume it began in part in most recent manifestation back with Buckley and Goldwater and Friedman and reached fruition with Reagan and a Republican Congress. Has it subsided in your judgment, or does it have its same energy as a force, both in a cultural way and in a political way and in a social way?
Well, I'm not a conservative, so in a way
You're
I'm
a libertarian.
I'm a libertarian,
right?
And there are many kinds of conservatives. I don't agree with many. The meaning of a conservative is somebody who wants to conserve what you have, and I don't want to conserve what we have. I want to change what we have. I want to cut it down.
Yeah. In the interest of less government, in the interest of controlling your own affairs, in the interest that no one knows how to spend an individual's money more than that person does.
Absolutely.
And all of that.
You've been learning very well. You're a good student.
Milton Friedman, once a Nobel laureate, always a Nobel laureate,
Right.
Professor Emeritus, it's a pleasure to have you with me
Thank you.
here in San Francisco.
Once again, thank you guys so much. I love how this channel is growing. So many more people are getting turned on to these great thinkers, and their eyes are opening. Please keep sharing this content, like and subscribe so you can get notifications when new stuff comes out and gets posted. Also, check back on my previous video. It's a feature called Hard Money. You guys will love it. It is incredible. It's so well done. And a very special thank you to all you guys that have bought me a coffee and supported the channel through referral links. It's so helpful. It keeps me going. And I'm just so happy that this channel keeps growing and moving along. Thanks again, everybody.